there yet?
I need to actually go to our page.
Is it not there?
Okay. See it, but I got a notification that you guys. There we go. And then
We're not.
check with you and Taryn. I overheard y'all talking about Walmart. Emily wants to go to Walmart, so I told her she had to talk to y'all before she went today. So make sure and talk to her before you leave.
Emily?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So that's from there now.
Jeez.
I know.
Okay.
She says it's like. Well, I'm need nursing homes for the week program on Monday.
So is the day one?
Mm-hmm.
Did it fill up?
Not yet.
Did it full up?
Not yet. It hasn't. Did you see? I figured out what we're doing for our October trial.
Oh no! Let's see what.
I can't show you my favorite account, but it's string art that they usually do on wood. You do it on your pumpkin.
Well, you said string art pumpkin, but I don't know what that is, so I would have to see anything.
It's super cute. Like, how cute is that?
How neat! I like
Yeah,
that.
we
So
have,
are we gonna have templates, or what are we gonna do?
Yeah, I'm gonna print out a whole bunch of different ones that they can do. You see, that one is like boo and a thought bubble.
Yeah, I like that.
And
So we do it with like little push pins,
you use
or
hammers and then hammer and nail. You just hammer them with your pumpkin. I'm like, okay, well, I could go to the dollar store and get Dollar Tree and get dollar hammers.
yeah.
Nails I can just buy in an insane amount.
So like the small nails, though, right?
They're 1 inch nails. I thought it was cute.
That is cute.
You see, like that one has a little black moon on it.
That is cute.
And we have a whole bunch of like the flossy stuff, whatever this stuff's called.
Yarn.
It's not normal yarn. It's something floss. But I have a whole bunch of it, and Sarah had a whole bunch of it. So the only thing I literally have to buy is hammer and the pumpkins, of course.
There's a way. Because how many people?
It'll be 16 total. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry about our little conversation earlier. I had forgotten to push the mute button, so you guys got to hear us talking about our October programs. Today, I would like to welcome Katie Alexander. She is the County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences for Daviess County, and she tells us today about pressure canning. Katie transferred to Daviess County from Webster County this past March. She has been an agent for 15 years and has her bachelor's degree in dietetics and her master's in public health, both from Western Kentucky University. Thank you for joining us today, Katie. Are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Katie?
Can you hear
me? Oh, I can't hear her.
No. You still not hear me?
There you are. I think my volume was turned down. I'm just having all kinds of technical issues today. All right.
No problem. Just want to be sure you could hear me.
So I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't?
I cannot hear you. Other speakers, if you don't mind, just to see if it's my computer. There you are. I think my volume was turned down. I'm just having all kinds of technical issues today. All right.
No problem.
Okay, so you're good on your end. It's just my computer. So if you want to go ahead and start, we'll get going.
Okay, I will share my screen. Okay. Well, like she said, I'm Katie Alexander from the Daviess County Extension Office, and the Extension Service is an actual extension of the University of Kentucky. And there's a county office in every county in Kentucky. You've probably heard of 4-H. We have 4-H Youth and Development, Agriculture and Natural Resources, Family and Consumer Sciences, and Horticulture. So we are here, to give research-based information out to our county. You all are our clientele. So today, like she said, we're going to be talking about pressure canning. And if I can advance my slide. Oh, hang on a second. There we go. Okay. So, like I said, we're going to talk about pressure canning. Some reasons to home can your own foods is to preserve your harvest from your personal gardens or your local farmer's market. And you can gain control over what exactly you put in your product as far as salt and sugar and other preservatives. It can save you money, prepare better tasting canned foods, and for some, it's just continuing a family tradition of preserving their own homegrown foods. Sorry about that. So microorganisms do live on the surface of all fresh foods. Therefore, you should always use research-based methods when preserving your foods. And there are two processes. You can either do a boiling water bath or the pressure canning, which is what we're going to focus on today. There are also some resources that I'll show you at the end, some reliable research-based resources, publications from the Extension Service, as well as the Ball Blue Book, which you may have heard of. And we have a So Easy to Preserve book, which is by the University of Georgia Extension. But I'll show you those at the end. All those are reliable resources and recipes. Now, we do lose advantages of home canning when we start with poor quality produce. So you want to be sure you start with a better produce to have a better end product. Like if you're doing green beans, you snap off the ends, rinse them off. You want to be sure and snap off any bad spots because you do not want to can poor quality produce because that can affect, the quality, the texture, the taste, and everything when you do go to consume it after preserving it. So some lose advantages of home canning when you use the poor quality, like I mentioned. Jars fail to seal properly if you use spoiled foods, and then deterioration of color and texture and flavors and things like that. So we're going to talk about the pressure canning method, but like I said, there's also the boiling water canner. It depends on the type of raw product you're using and if the recipe has the addition of an acid. So to ensure that your finished product is safe, it's crucial that you do not change the recipe, do not change or modify the recipe, the processing time, or the processing method. There are no conversions, no USDA approved conversions available to go from boiling water to pressure or vice versa, or to change any times. You will note that open kettle canning, oven canning, and the use of small pressure cookers are not recommended for home canning. Steam canners are a whole different story. They are safe for high acid foods. And I do have a resource on that if anybody's interested, but for the main focus, it's boiling water and pressure canner. So now, pressure canning is for pressure canning low acid foods like meat, poultry, seafood, and all vegetables. Pressure canners can reach a high enough temperature between 240 and 250 degrees and be attained and at a 10 to 15 pounds of pressure and maintain that for the whole specified time according to the recipe to destroy the bacterial spores that cause botulism. So that's why it's important that you follow the recipe and the time and the weight exactly. But it does, the time and everything will depend on the size of the jar you're using, whether you're using pints or quarts, and the way it's packed, whether you do raw pack or hot pack, and of course the kind of food. So currently, the USDA recommendation, if you are preserving tomatoes, whether it be boiling water or pressure canning, it is important that you add an acid like lemon juice to them, just because the variety of tomatoes and when they're picked, the ripeness can all change the variation of how acidic the tomatoes are. So that's important to note that tomatoes, no matter how you're canning the recipe, you need to add an acid to those. So now we'll go over the equipment. Basically the same equipment besides the type of canner will be used for pressure canning and boiling water. You'll need, of course, your pressure canner, your jar lifter, a funnel, canning rack. The canning rack is important because you want to have that in the bottom of your canner so your jars do not sit directly on the bottom of the canner. You need the rack in there to keep a little bit of space. A plastic jar bubble remover, ladles, timer, dishcloths or towels, and also paper towels. Now, it's important to note that equipment, pressure canners since 1997 have more safety features and are lighter in weight. So I know a lot of people are scared of pressure canners. A lot of people won't use them because of, maybe a grandmother, mother, or somebody, they exploded on them. The really old ones did not have as many safety features, and sometimes, jars and stuff did explode just because there's too much pressure built up, or they, undid the lid too soon before it depressurized and all those kind of things. The canners now have more safety features, and if you follow the, manual instructions that come with them, you should be fine. So I don't want you all to be scared of using them. And of course, like I mentioned, the documentation, the instructions that come with it, it's important to keep it. You'll need to follow, the instructions for the particular pressure canner. They are different. There are different brands, different sizes. Some of them require 1 inch of water to 2 inches of water. Some of them on the inside will have a water line. That'll show you exactly where to fill the water up to. It doesn't take a lot. You're not filling the canner completely up. So you're just important to look at your manual instructions, and also your stove that you're using, be sure that it's okay to use a canner on, especially if you have a flat top or glass top stove. Some of those, I've known of someone to put a canner on a glass top and it shattered the glass top from the heat and the pressure. So be sure before you start, if you've never canned on your stove before and you have a flat top or glass top, be sure that your stove is safe for canning. So there are 2 types of gauges on a pressure canner. You can have a dial gauge, which is exactly what it is. It's a dial that has the 5, 10, 15 pounds. It'll show you, they're easy to read. It indicates the pounds of pressure. You need to check it for accuracy every year before you use it, and you can bring your lid. We don't need the whole canner, just the lid. If it's a dial gauge, you can bring it to the extension office and we can check it to be sure that it's recording the right amount of pressure. And if it reads too high or too low by more than 2 pounds, then you need to replace it. If it's within that 1 to 2 pound, it's safe to use, but it's always important to get it checked so we'll know exactly what it's reading. And the testing is free of charge. Just to call the office and make arrangements to bring it by, and it takes 5 minutes if I'm in the office. Now the weighted gauge is a little different. A counterweight or a pressure regulator covers the vent to allow the pressure to build. Some of the weights are round, like the one that's pictured. Those different holes are the different amounts of pressure, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, and depending on which hole you put it on is how much pressure is what you're putting on the lid for it to build up. So, and that they'll usually jiggle when it's building up the correct pressure. It's important to read the manual on these to know that if you need to be listening for a constant jiggle or just a steady rock, to know when you have the correct pressure building, so when when to start your processing time. So those are a little bit trickier, but if you're used to using it, then it's just as easy as using the dial gauge. We can't test those, but you want to be sure that your weights, a lot of them are like that round one that's pictured. Some of them will have little rings that stack, and each one is 5 pounds. But you want to be sure they don't have any nicks or anything in them, because if they have a nick, then obviously the amount of pounds is going to be off. So you just want to be sure and check that. Now, going through the steps, of course, you're going to get all your equipment together first. So that way you have everything, your pressure canner, your rack, your funnel, your measuring spoons, timer. Your timer is important. And like we said, dishcloth, ladle, jar lifter, a spatula, towels, and things like that. Everything you see pictured is important to get it all together before you start. Of course, it's important to wash all your empty jars in hot soapy water and rinse before using. You can also run them in a dishwasher if you have a sanitation cycle. You can run it on the sanitizing cycle and then use them. Jars that are going to be processed less than 10 minutes should be sterilized for 10 minutes. And if they're going to be, and they can be boiled in a large pot for 10 minutes to sterilize them and then use them. If they're going to be processed for longer, you don't have to sterilize them for 10 minutes. You just need to wash them, sanitize them, and use them. And of course, you always want to remember, if you have jar breakage and stuff, a lot of time it's from the difference in temperatures going hot to cold. It can cause the jars to break. Okay. So like I said before, starting with the best produce will give you the best product. So you want to inspect it for any deterioration, bad spots. Just take those off. Don't use them. Rinse them and dry them. And then you're going to fill your jars. Start with your recipe, whether it's hot or raw pack. Like in this picture, it's green beans that are being raw packed, which means they've been snapped and rinsed, and they're going in the jars cold, but they're going to put boiling water on top of them. And then you're going to position them in the canner. Okay. And then, of course, it's important to use a canning funnel. Just easier when you're pouring the liquid in, so you don't make as big of a mess, to use one. Now in the pictures, it does not show using a funnel, but it will go cleaner and easier if you do use a funnel and using a ladle to fill the jars. And be sure and clean the rim of the jars, because that's where your lid is going to go directly on. You don't want anything on there to keep it from getting a good vacuum seal. And you want to use like a damp paper towel instead of a dish towel, because you don't want the lint and the fibers from the towel to get on there, because that can cause the seal not to take as well. So it's important to use a damp paper towel. And like I mentioned, the two methods, raw pack and hot pack. Raw pack is used for delicate foods, which are easier to handle raw, like green beans. And it may be shrinkage during processing time, which can cause them to float and expand in some headspace. But green beans are typically raw packed, and you're covering the raw product with boiling water into the jars. And hot pack, of course, your produce is going to be hot. You're going to cook it, preheating the food for a specified length of time before putting them into jars. And you're going to place the hot food into hot jars. And sometimes it will require fewer jars because you can get more in there. You want to remove air. It's going to remove more air from the food being cooked or being heated. And then that can require less time in the canner for it to reach a boiling. And then, of course, it can maintain color and flavor better than raw packed, but some produce is better raw packed than hot packed. So it's important to go by your recipes. And then, of course, your headspace. That's basically just the space between the top of the product and the top of the jar. The proper headspace ensures a good vacuum seal. If too little headspace is allowed, then the food may expand and bubble out, leaving stuff on the rim and can interfere with the seal. If you have too much headspace, then the food may discolor or the jar may not seal properly with the processing time because it did not allow for all the air to be driven out of the jar. So typically, your juices, jams, and jellies have a 1/4 inch headspace. So it's going to be a lot closer to the top of the jar. And your tomatoes and like pickles, cucumbers, things like that are going to have a 1/2 inch. And then your vegetables like green beans and also all your meats, your low acid, are typically going to have a 1 inch headspace. If you have something that marks, like the bubbler I'm going to show you, marks the inches of the headspace, if you don't have that, you can usually go by the glass lips on the jar up at the top where the band screws on. That first bottom one where the first lip pops out is about 1 inch, and then the next one's about a 1/2 inch, and the last one up closer to the top is about a 1/4 inch. So you can kind of eyeball it if you don't want to measure it exactly. And I mentioned I called a bubbler or bubble remover. It is plastic, like what's being shown in the picture. A lot of them will come if you buy the little packages of canning equipment, like by Ball or someone. You usually come with a bubble remover, but you don't have to have that. You can use a plastic knife, the handle of a plastic spoon. Just be sure that it's plastic. Do not use metal utensils to poke around in there to try to get the air bubbles out because you could damage the jar and other things. So just be sure that it's plastic, that you move around there and it removes the excess bubbles in the air. And then sometimes the product will, go in a little bit more and you can add product to it because you've made more room by getting rid of the air bubbles. And of course, the lids, it's recommended that you use a 2-piece screw band and flat lid. The lid is what has the seal, like up in the top picture. The edge is the seal, and then those cannot be reused. Those are a one-time use only. So once you use them, then you throw them away once you're done with that product. The 2 bottoms show a damaged lid and then a used lid because you can tell where the seal has been used and spread out. You can see the little marks, so you can tell that it's been used. So do not reuse the lids. It has the sealing compound. The rings can be reused if they're not rusty or nicked or anything. And also, it's important to read if you buy some new lids this year. Read the box and see if it says you need to put them in simmering water to moisten the seal. Older ones, some brands, you still need to put them in water to moisten the seal. Newer brands, it's not recommended that you have to put them in simmering water to moisten the band. So be sure and read the box to see what it says. I have had a call about 1-piece canning lids. Those are not recommended for pressure canning. If you happen to see them, they're usually used more in commercial. They're okay for boiling water home canning, but do not use them for pressure canning. I know some people were looking for other things to use when there was a little bit of a shortage with the whole COVID and everything. People started growing their own gardens and they're trying to can more. So, but just be sure you use the proper equipment and tools for canning. So, of course, like we said, once you put your product in, wipe the jar rim. You're going to place the ring on the jar, or place the lid and then the ring, just hand tight. You don't want to over tighten it because that can cause it to buckle and charge it to, crack and just have a bad product. So do not over tighten the rings, just hand tight and then put them in. And then once they come out, once they've set, then you can take the rings off or tighten them up a little bit if you need to. But it's important not to over tighten those rings. And like we mentioned before, depending on what your canner says, 1 to 2 inches of water Use a jar lifter to set your jars in there on top of the the thing that's in there to keep it off the bottom of the canner. It's easier than using your hands because sometimes if you do have it on a low heat, you could get burned, or sometimes you might drop the jar. So it's just easier to use the jar lifter to pick it up and take it out of the canner. And you want to keep them upright because they are not sealed yet. So if you start moving them from side to side, some of that liquid that's in there could get in between the lid and the jar and then cause it not to seal. And then you're ready to fasten the canner lid on your canner, and you're going to leave the weight off or the vent port open, depending on if you have a weighted gauge or the dial gauge. Leave that open, and then, of course, get your heat going. Put it on high until the water boils, and you're going to wait for a funnel of steam to come out. You're going to want that to set it for 10 minutes. Once you see a good funnel of steam coming out of that port, set your timer for 10 minutes. And then once you've got a good steady steam for 10 minutes, then you can close that petcock or place the weighted gauge on top of the port to close it off so it'll start to build the pressure. And then once it builds up, like if you read on your dial, you've gotten to 11 pounds or your weighted gauge starts to jiggle, then you start your processing time. That 10 minutes of steam is not your processing time. Once you build up to the pressure, then you start the processing time that's in your recipe. Okay. I kind of already went over that. Start your pressure. When the reading indicates the correct pressure, then you start your processing time. And then, of course, it's important to regulate the heat, to try to keep it at the correct pounds. Loss of pressure at any time can result in underprocessing or unsafe food. And if you have quick and large pressure variations during the processing, it can result in liquid loss from the jars. So you want to be sure and try to keep it steady. So you need to keep an eye on it while you're processing. If it does drop below the recommended pounds and you just need to increase the heat back up to get the canner back up to the correct pressure, and then start your processing time over to be sure you get the correct processing time at the correct amount of pressure. Okay, then once your processing time is done, it's recommended if you can to remove it off the stove to get it off the heat and allow it to cool naturally and return to zero pressure. You do not want to force it to cool. You can lose liquid from the jars. You can cause some of the seals to fail, and it may also warp your canner if you try to pull it too quickly. So you want to be sure and let it cool naturally and return to zero pressure. Some older canners can take up to an hour to depressurize, so don't be surprised if it takes a little bit of time, but you do not want to do it too quickly. So once it's completely depressurized, which some of them, the ones now will have a little vent, a little thing that will pop up in the back. When there's pressure in it, it'll pop out. And then when it's depressurized, it'll pop back down. It'll go flat, and there's no pressure in there. So you want to make sure it's completely depressurized, and then your lid lock drops before removing your weight or your vent port that you covered. Wait 10 minutes and then unfasten it and carefully remove it. You want to remove the lid, with the underside out, the top to your face, kind of like a shield. So when you bring it up, it's shielding your face from the canner. So if there is any steam or anything, you're not as likely to get burned. So it's important to take the lid off correctly. And then, of course, removing your jars one at a time with the jar lifter. Keep the jars upright and then carefully place on a towel. And you want to leave at least an inch in between each jar so they can cool properly. If you put them too close together, then all that heat's going to stay in that little area, and it's going to take even longer for them to cool. You want to leave them undisturbed for 12 hours, and you'll start hearing the pop as they start to seal. If you happen to sit them and they're right underneath like an air conditioning vent, then you can place a towel, just across them. That way they don't cool too quickly. But if they're just in a spot where there's not a direct air vent or anything, then just leave them alone like they are on the towel, spaced out so they can cool. And then after 12 to 24 hours, you need to test your seals. There shouldn't be any give when you touch them, that shouldn't concave in. If it does, then it did not seal. But if they're all sealed, then you can wash the outside, just wipe off the outside of the jars, the lids, and store them in a cool, dry place for up to 2 years. 2 years is max for storing your canned product. And you always want to date and label your jars. Now, the jars you can reuse, so you can stick a label on them. You just want to be sure and get it off before you reprocess it, before you use it again. But you can also, the lids are not reused, and they actually have a spot on there to put the month, day, and year. So you can write on those with a permanent marker, and then that way those just get thrown away. You don't have to worry about putting anything on your jar. And of course, be sure they're properly sealed. If they didn't, if they, have some give in the middle that they didn't seal, you want to remove the ring and the lid. Be sure there aren't any nicks or cracks. If there's any, product on the rims, wipe off the rims, and you can wipe your lid and ring off, put them back on, and you can reprocess them as long as it's within 24 hours from the first processing time. If it's over 24 hours, then and you can put them in the fridge and eat it within the first couple of days if you know that you went through the correct process and that it's safe to eat. If not, you can always toss it out. But if it's within 24 hours and if you had 2 or 3 not sealed, you can reprocess them. And of course, if you have jars that have become unsealed, after they've set a while, over the 24 hours, if there's dried food or anything on the outside, cloudy liquid, if there's bubbles still bubbling up, anything that looks odd, a bad odor, mold, if you open it up and there's mold growth, just dispose of all those. You do not need to eat any of those. A lot of this information you go to the national website, the national canning, you can go to nchfp.uga.edu. That's the University of Georgia site that has a lot of the canning information and can answer questions on there. You can also call me at the extension office if you have any questions as well. High altitudes, we don't have an high altitude in this area, but some areas do, so they do have to adjust their processing and everything that they do, and there is resources for that. Okay, so that was a quick run through pressure canning. It is a lot, but I do want to encourage you, if you have all the supplies and the correct equipment, to try it, not to be afraid to try it. The resources you can get, like I said, from the extension office. You can also, if you want to watch a video, you can check out YouTube, and if you search the UK College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, 2 of our specialists have videos up of going through the canning process for boiling water and pressure canning. So you can go and watch those if you want to, see it done before you try doing it. And let's see, I'm going to show you a couple of resources and equipment. So let me unshare this. Okay. So the things I mentioned, the bubbler, this is the headspace. It's got the little indentions with your 1 inch, 1 inch, 3/4, half, and a 1/4 inch. And all you do is sit that on top of the jar. Like if you need a 1/4 inch, you would sit the 1/4 inch mark right on top of the jar, and you would put your product in there up until that line right there. And you could go up to an inch. You don't have to have that. Like I said, you can kind of judge on the jar, and then you turn it over and use it as a bubble remover. The 2-piece lid, just as it is, 2 pieces, the ring and the lid. This does not get reused. This can. And then, of course, I mentioned the jar lifter for putting your jars in and out of the canner. And this is the So Easy to Preserve by the University of Georgia. The University of Georgia Extension. You can order it, buy it. It has all kinds of recipes, question answers, information in it, good research-based information. There's also, I mentioned the Ball Blue Book. Ball is a popular canning company. They have a recipe book that's research-based. You can find these usually at Walmart. Amazon, places like that. The University of Georgia one, you need to go to their website. And then at our office, we have our publications that are free. I have a few of these books left, and it's just a book compiled of all of our publications on canning, on drying, on freezing. They are free of charge. You just call or email me, let me know you need one. I'll give these away till they're gone. And then after that, we'll start putting together our publications. It'll just look a little different, but we'll still put it in booklet form. If you don't want all the publications, you can request, if you just want, canning tomatoes, or if you just want basics of canning or pickling, drying, you can request certain ones. But those are free of charge. So you can just get them at your extension office. And that's all I've got.
Hey, Katie, that was great. Thank you for all the information. My computer's working now, so I was able to hear you.
Oh, good.
Currently, it doesn't look like I have any questions for you. I think people are probably processing.
It is a lot of information.
Yeah, I've always known it's like a lot of steps, but I never looked into it that much. And it is a lot, but I bet it's worth it.
It is. And once you're doing it and you have all the equipment, you get it together. It's just a process of going through it, but it can be done.
Yeah. One of my friends actually, her mom cans, and it does taste way better. I will tell you that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and hopefully we can do this again.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you, Katie. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.